Good morning or good afternoon. Depends on when you're watching this. I guess you could be watching it late at night too. So we're going to review in this the brief history of the English language. Please fill out your guided notes as you're watching this video. Right. So going back as far as we can, we're talking about 8,000 BC. And we had the Sumerian language, right? This was in part of modern of Iraq, Mesopotamia. And this was our first language spoken and then written was actually like pictures and symbols. And it was used to represent trades, goods, livestock. The form of writing that they created was cuneiform. And what they did is they wrote, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner here, they wrote on little clay blocks. Right? And they would actually use like a stylus and draw these on clay blocks. So that was what we know as the first written language. Now, it did change over time. Language evolves, writing evolves over time. So you can see here, 3000 BC, right? What symbols look like. 2800 BC, 2500 BC, 1800 BC, and 600 BC. So if you took the word woman, right, it started with this little triangle with a line. Then it kind of went sideways. Then it kind of went triangle with extra lines. Then they added more. Then it went to this. Right, so then after that, Akkadian came. This started around 2800 BC and went through to about 500 AD. Remember, these dates are like rough estimates. It's when the language existed to the best of our ability. We know that with history. It gradually replaced the Sumerian as the primary spoken language. So it took a while to replace it. So for a period of time, there were both languages, right? Then slowly Akkadian replaced Sumerian. The Sumerian language, however, still was the one used for sacred things, ceremonies, scientific, all that was, kept in the Sumerian language until about the 1st century. The Akkadians adapted the cuneiform writing. Whenever you have two languages existing at the same time, one is going to influence the other. So what happens, we have these two languages, Sumerian and Akkadian, and even though Akkadian come out to eventually be what we would call the winner of the two language, the most used, the people that used Sumerian words, right, they used it in with the Akkadian language. So we had Akkadian used the most, but there were still some Sumerian words in there. Right? There was not a lot of people that could write in this language. Only your most high people in society were taught to write. And usually that was your religious leaders, your priests, and they kept the records. And what did they write? They wrote accounting records, right? They would keep track of how much food there was, what the weather was like, how many people lived in each section, right? They had letters, anything that was to do with religious. And then they also wrote epics. From this, we get the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Epic of the Flood story. And we also have the Code of, I am going to guess pronouncing it Hammurabi, but that could be incorrect. And it's Epic of Gilgamesh. I think I mispronounced that earlier. I'm sorry. So these are the three writings we get from Akkadian time. Right? And the Epic of the Flood story was very closely related to what the Bible says about the story of Noah and the flood. Right? A lot think that is the same story and time frame. Remember, this was anywhere from 2800 BC to 500 AD. Right, so in their writing, this right here, right, looks like a lot of doodles to us, but what it equals, it says, if a man accuses another man of homicide but cannot prove the charge, that man shall be executed. So this was their written language during the time. For me, that would be very hard to understand. No way would I get this saying from these pictures. Here are some more examples, right? Now we're getting into, as time progresses, right, closer to the 500 BC, they adopted an alphabet. And these symbols related to the alphabet over here. And then we have in theirs, right, and then the translation. If the seller has passed on, the buyer will receive up to 5 times the fine for that judgment from the seller's estate. And here is our other translation, and we're going to go to the next slide, because yes, I hope you can hear this. If not, you can download the slideshow and play it. Great. So, Acadia turned into Aramaic 400 BC to 1090. And this is when we get a more secure alphabet here. And we have the Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All humans are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. This was their laws, right? So Aramaic first was it was the main language of the Jews at one point. The Dead Sea Scrolls, some of them use this language. It is still used today, right? In Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, there are parts of that still use this language. And they did adopt an alphabet from the Phoenicians. So at least it looks more like our alphabet. We're getting closer to English here. Right. And then we have the Old Arabic, 300 to 500 AD. The most famous writing of this is the Quran, and that is still used and read today. It's been translated into various language, but their original language is Old Arabic. Then from there, we get to Old English. Old English is 450 AD to 1060 AD. So we have the German tribes that came in our last session. We learned about the German tribes that came and invaded the British islands. So we have the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. They settled around Britain, and Britain, remember, was inhabited by the Celts. The German tribes had their own alphabet, right? And somehow between the German tribes and the Celts coming together, we get Old English. Beowulf was written during the Old English period, somewhere between 700 and 1000 AD. Although we don't know when Beowulf originally, because remember, these stories were told hundreds of years by word of mouth before they were ever written down. Right? So we don't know how old the story of Beowulf is, but we know it was written down somewhere between 700 and 1000 AD. Right, so when the Norman conquest came, which we talked about last time, this ended our Old English that was in 1066. With the Norman taking over, we get Middle English. Middle English was greatly influenced by French, right? Our French language, because the Normans spoke French, right? And they brought many words. And the most notable change was the vocabulary of law and government, right? We use the French words. Words started to lose their endings, and this made it simpler and more regular. So we're getting more people speaking, still yet they can't really read or write it. Again, that was only the highest of societies that could read and write. Our late Middle English is about 1300 to 1500 AD. And this, again, influenced by French. An event happened here that made all the official documents be switched to English. And that was the 100-Year War. Right. So during that time, they decided everything needed to be switched to English, all official documents. And during this time, the Canterbury Tales was written, and that's Geoffrey Chaucer. He was the first writer that we acknowledge that wrote in English. And we are going to read his after Beowulf. But that was Middle English. And then we get to Modern English, which goes from 1500 AD all the way to today. Right? We got the printing press in 1476. Books could be mass produced. This meant more people had access to books, which means more people learned to read and write. We had the standardization of English. We also got a lot of words from Greek and Latin and incorporated them into the English. The first dictionary was created, excuse me, in 1604. The Alphabetical of Hard Words, that was our first dictionary. A very important, the most popular book, the King James Bible, was translated into English. There's a lot of theories as to why the Bible, King James had the Bible translated into English. Mostly it was believed that it was a political view, so more people would like him. We had the rise of the British Empire, and that had a very great impact on English language. English language then started to be spread throughout the world as a common language. And we had, during this time, William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet was first performed in 1597. So modern language goes for a long period of time. We are currently still in modern language. So it's very funny when people say Shakespeare wrote in Old English. No, he didn't. He wrote in modern English. It's just evolved over the years. More modern, okay, I'm sorry, examples of how things have changed from old, middle to modern English. Right? We had drinking, drink. See how we said the endings kind of were dropped off? Windus, windies, wins. These are all modern English, right? All of these. Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Mary Shelley, Mark Twain, H.G. Wells, and to today is still modern. Harry Potter, right? Divergent, Book Thief, Maze Runner, Aragon, Holes, Outsiders, Ender's Game, Legend, right? One of Us is Lying. All of these are modern language. Right. This is Beowulf. This is Old English. Of course, we're not going to be reading in that because we can't read in that. But this is what Beowulf looks like. Now, here's a reading of a professor reading it in Old English. This is what it would sound like.
Flat way gar dana in yar dagun feud kuninga thrimye fruno hutha athalingus ellen fremi oft shield shaving shad and a threatum monegum maig thum meru setla ofter egg so de erolas suthan arist word fashaft fundi Hidas frovra jebad weox under hoknum we earth mundum fa or that him I gwilch that are umsetindra over kron rade huran shulde gomban yildan. That was good kuning. Them after was, after Kenneth, young in yardroom, funny good sende foke de frovre. Fear in tharve onya, that he drugon aldor laze longe Kim thas lifre wodres walden, wordare foria. Beo was brene, blad vide sprang, shuldes avra shedilandum in. Swa shall young guma, gore je weertjen, from veel hiftum fader bearme, that hine an ulde eft je wunigen, will je sidas, thone weekume, leod je las. lof darum shall.
Right. So could you understand any of that? Here's our translation. This is what he just read. So the Spear Danes in days gone by, and the kings who ruled them have courage and greatness. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaigns. There were shield Shephan, scourged by many tribes, a wrecker of mead benches, ramping among foes. This terror of the hall troops had come far. So it's important to understand the three different ages of English: Old English, Middle English, and Modern English, because we're going to go through all three in this class.